You know, one of the things that we're talking about with the unrest that we're seeing in America is what do we do about it and where did it come from? And there's many parents here, and we know what it's like to have a child that's sick. And one of the things that happens when a child has a cough or a fever, whatever, we generally don't attack the cough or the fever. We deal with the root of the problem. The root of the problem is a virus that's causing a specific reaction. And one of the things I think is a challenge for us is remembering that there's a root to this. What happened in Ferguson, situation in New York, as well as the history of racism in America is really a symptom, but it's not the root of the sickness. The Bible tells us in Matthew that in the last days, nation will rise up against nation. The Greek word there is ethnos. So what we're seeing right now is really something that Jesus predicted already, that there would be racial conflict in the world. Racism is not solely an American problem. There's a book that I just got today on Amazon talking about the history of racism in Australia, the challenge between the fallout with colonialism and the Aboriginal Australians. For those of us that are sports fans, I think it was year 2000 in the Sydney Games, there was a young lady named Kathy Freeman that won the 200 and the 400, and she was a gold medalist. And she came in and she lit the flame. And the reason why that was very powerful is because of the divide between white Australians and Aboriginal Australians. And so we recognize that racism is a global problem that has a unique story in the United States. The scriptures tell us, in addition to Jesus' prediction of racial conflict, it says in Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7, it says this, that my house will be a house of prayer for all nations. At the very end of the Bible, in chapter 7, it tells us, it shows us a moment where there is an uncountable multitude of people from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation that are honoring God and Jesus at the center. At the very end of Revelation, it says that the tree of life, the leaves of the tree of life are for the healing of the nations. So all throughout the scriptures, it tells us that race is an issue, but in addition to it being a burden, and we're talking about the burden tonight, it is God's intention and his purpose for the burden to be beautiful. And there's a beauty in this whole conversation when we see it done properly that allows us to see the kingdom of God in a new way. So what I would want to propose to our conversation as we deal with the reality of racism, the systemic, it's structural, it deals with health and education, it's relational, it's all these different things, and that's a reality. But we can't forget that it's also spiritual. And the roots of racism go all the way back to the beginning where two brothers had an issue with one another. And so it's very important that we recognize this. It is my perspective that racism is not a black problem or a white problem. It is not a human problem. It's a spiritual problem in a principality, like the scriptures tell us, and ruling spirits that are causing damage in the world in which we live. Now, what does that mean for us? Does that mean that, okay, we need to simply pray? No, I do believe we need to communicate. I do think we need to build relationship. We need to understand some of the systemic problems that we have in our nation and the nations of the earth that cause these issues for people. But the enemy would want us to simply point fingers at the symptoms and forget about the root of the issue. The root of the issue is sin. The root of the issue is spiritual, but the cure we already possess because the scriptures tell us from one blood he made every nation of men. So that means that our color is a part of God's intention for us. God, our culture is a part of God's mosaic because when we love each other properly, the world recognizes that we belong to Jesus and they see his face in a brand new way. So, and this is huge. This is huge for me because I feel like this is one of the preeminent issues facing the church as we continue to move forward. We have the cure. We are the answer to the problem. We are part of the solution because we can show the world something that they cannot replicate in any other way, that beyond the barriers of race, culture, money, and everything else, we are one through one blood, his name being Jesus. Amen. So let's make sure in all of our discussions not to minimize anything that we're discussing. Not at all. I'm not saying, oh, well, it's all good in the neighborhood. What I am saying is the only way that we can solve this, in addition to some of these things that we're doing at the ground level, we have to recognize that Jesus empowers us spiritually to deal with the spiritual stronghold that's been in America for hundreds of years. It's not a new problem, it's an old problem. Just another. Preach.